What's up, y'all? It's your girl Cornelia back with another episode of Black News, a podcast where we break down current events, hot topics, and local stories involving Black people. Now let's get into it. I feel like I should have waited now for the fourth week to talk about Ryan Coogler because I'm going to give y'all the heads up. This entire podcast episode is going to be about Sinners, the movie. This entire episode is going to be about Sinners, the movie. It's going to be spoiler city. So if you have not watched, hey, you can turn it off. I'll tell y'all if I remember, because once I get in, baby, once I get cooking, baby, I got to get cooking on this. Once I get in it, I'm going to try to remember to say spoiler alert. But this entire episode is going to be a Sinners movie review. And rightfully so, because as I expected, Ryan Coogler delivered once again a fantastic piece of art and cinema to the masses that while it was for everyone's consumption and it was enjoyable for people of all backgrounds, I feel like it was made specifically for us. And I think I'm not the only one who feels like Ryan Coogler's, all of his movies are that way. And I'm not going to go too much down the road with that, but y'all, this was fantastic. 10 out of 10, 11 out of 10. No notes from me. No notes from me. And he did an interview on the press run and he was saying how one thing he wanted people to feel when they left the movie theater is like they had a full meal. And I felt like I had a full meal. I was excited. I had an enjoyable experience. I was saddened. I experienced grief, high emotions, low emotions, you name it. I went through all of it while about experiencing this film. And baby, I've been on social media talking all day and night. The night after I saw it, which was Friday, saw it Friday afternoon. Late that night, y'all, I couldn't even sleep good. I couldn't sleep good to the point where I woke up, ran my errands, did my grocery shopping and everything, and I went back to the theater to see it for a second time. I had to get in on it 2 times. And then side note, it's noisy in the background because I guess my neighbor decided to have a house party right when I'm talking about one of the best pieces of art that I have seen in a very, very, very long time. This is one of Ryan Coogler's best films. This is one of his best. I'll also say this is also Michael B. Jordan's best work, in my opinion. This is some of Michael B. Jordan's best work. Michael B. Jordan played twins in this movie. Okay, so we're gonna get spoiler alert. Now's the time. I'm gonna start getting into all of the details of the movie. So spoiler alert if you have not watched. Spoiler, spoiler, spoiler. Spoiler, spoiler, spoiler. Michael B. Jordan played twins in this movie. Smoke and Stack, Elijah and Elias. That was their actual name. And this movie was set in 1932 Clarksdale, Mississippi. It follows Smoke and Stack as they return to Clarksdale to open up a juke joint, which was the early days, their version of a nightclub in an abandoned, we found out later it was like a warehouse or a slaughterhouse or, some type of a building that they bought from a man who we later found out was basically the grand wizard of the Ku Klux Klan. But we get to that point later. We also learn that some of the things that Smoke and Stack were notorious for, because their name rang out throughout the city in that town of Clarksdale, they were known for crime. Okay. They had a notorious reputation. People were scared of them and people were very intimidated by their reputation and their presence. But they were rumored to have been working for the Irish and the Italian mob in Chicago. At one point throughout the movie, we heard them insinuate or mention how Stack, one of the twins, was selling ass up in Little Rock. So basically, he was a pimp. They was robbing trains. And a side note before I get too deep in this, if you are one of those people who love like additional tidbits about the movie, on Spotify's Center's artist page, people found that they somebody created the show or the movie created newspaper articles describing instances of the bank robbery, the working for the mob, and also another character, Remick, who was the vampire, which we'll get into in just a second. So when Smoke and Stack arrive, they are both tasked, and the first half of this movie spends a lot of time character and world building, which I really appreciate because what it essentially does, it makes us care about all of these people before the shit hit the fan. We see them both picking up their younger cousin Sammy, who is they call him preacher boy because his father is the pastor of a church. His father, who essentially is trying to condemn Sammy playing worldly music or the devil's music. And that is just not his path. Sammy wants to be a blues artist, and his big cousins pick him up and they start on their path in their journey. We learn that Smoke and Stack killed their own father. Their mother, throughout the movie, their mother died in childbirth. Stack got stuck in the mother. Their father used to beat them because the mother passed. She beat them to the point where Smoke killed the father, and they buried them. So a lot of trauma and a lot of they were calling themselves, or people were referencing it, evilness, but just a lot of pain, a part of their lives and their upbringing, which could be what led to them living life the way they did. They go on to pick up a character, Delta Slim, who is played by the legendary Delroy Lindo, who completely embodied this role to a T. Okay. Delta Slim was a harmonica and piano player, blues player who lived in the South, who had some very traumatic experiences and some backstory, to just give some more detail about his life and things that he went through. And we also were introduced around the same time that we met Delta Slim with Haley Steinfeld's character Mary, who is as a colored woman who is passing as white, not by choice, but by force. And I say that because, and people have been doing a lot of arguing on social media about Mary's character in particular. We learn in the movie that Mary's mother had a half black father. So Mary's grandfather was half black, but she looks like a white woman. Well, if you think about 1930s Mississippi, a white woman or a woman who is perceived as white is not safe in black communities, nor is that community safe with her present. So it is advised and insinuated that Stack, who she had a romantic relationship with, there was a lot of history there. They decided, or he basically pushed her to move to Little Rock to pass and marry a white man and to just live away from them. Not with him because she wanted him to be with her and he ultimately loved her as well. But she was passing. And she said, I didn't want to be white. So there's that element and conversation about passing within this movie, which was a fantastic insert. We were introduced to Annie, who is Smoke's love interest. And one thing I loved about this whole press run and lead up to the movie, we were pitched and given the impression that the main love story in this movie was between Stack and Haley Steinfeld's character, Mary. But in actuality, the deepest, the richest, and the most electric, in my opinion, relationship in this movie was between Smoke and Annie. Annie was an apothecary. She was a hoodoo practitioner who lived in Clarksdale and was visited by Smoke, who returned after 7 years with his brother again to open up the juke joint. We found out that they had a baby together that passed. We find out that there was a dynamic in their relationship where Smoke didn't necessarily believe in some of the things that she practices, but we learned that he respected who she was and accepted that that's who she was and didn't interfere with that, even though there was pushback from because of his own personal beliefs and hesitations about what he believes to be true, to the point where Annie makes him a mojo bag, which has essentially kept him safe for 7 years while he was out in the world doing whatever. And when I tell you the love scene in this between Smoke and Annie's character, who's played by again Michael B. Jordan, and Wunmi Osaku, that was one of the sexiest. When I tell you that y'all, that love scene, and it was just, if you saw the movie and you watched it, the second time I watched it made me really emotional. And it's because, in movies and in world now, especially now, and hell, even back whenever, people like to romanticize partnership and relationships. And now we are in an era as women where we don't like to take no shit. We heard all the horror stories. Our grandmas and aunties told us all this stuff, and we've learned the lessons, and now we know what our worth is. But we also are very nuanced and complicated human beings, and life does not act the way that we want. And sometimes we find ourselves in circumstances where people need understanding and grace, and things are very difficult. So the relationship between Smoke and Annie, to me, it made me very emotional because you had two people who obviously loved each other. I personally think within the story they were married and just he left, he left for whatever reason. I can get into that, but I'm not going to spend too much time on that. And found their way back to each other, and that love was still there. It was still very raw and passionate. And it was love between a man who looks like Michael B. Jordan and a real looking black woman. So I just loved it. I also appreciate how Michael B. Jordan, sorry y'all, I met Ryan Coogler. Y'all know what I mean. Ryan Coogler, how he writes black love in his movies. Because if you look at Nakia and T'Challa, and you look at Bianca and Adonis and Creed, and you look at Smoke and Annie, you can tell Ryan Coogler is married to a black woman and been with that black woman and been loving that black woman. You can tell that he is in a relationship that is nuanced, that is ups and downs, has passion, has respect, has commonality, and just a through line of overall want and desire for each other. You can tell in his writing, and I really got that from Smoking Annie's character. And again, let me go back and say this one more time. This is some of Michael B. Jordan's best work, because it's one thing when you get a script, and if you good, I would say if you good at your job, or if you get given a good script, even though most scripts, I would say all, require you to do character work and extensive breakdown. So it's a bitch to break down one character. And when I say breakdown, I'm talking about create a whole world, because the writer and Ryan Coogler seems like the type who he wrote these characters so specific that I imagine a lot of who they were is already on the paper. But you got to build the world. You got to figure out and create a story in your mind about where they from? When they were born, what was their life like? When they were here, what does that look like? How did these two people meet? What hurts them? What do they love? What are their regrets? What are their hopes and dreams? Even like down to the specifics. So to do that with one character is a lot, but to do that with two characters is insane. And then to have to act both of those simultaneously, back and forth, drop in and out of each character, and to also have done the character work and have to do that work to have built relationships with other characters in the movie on set in real time. That's a lot, and most people would not be able to do that. So kudos to Michael B. Jordan. We meet Bo and Grace, who are Chinese immigrants who are in Delta, Mississippi, owning a grocery store and essentially selling and being able to navigate white customers, Black customers in those two worlds in a sort of gray area, in which a lot of people did not realize that Chinese immigrants had a presence in the South and were also known as simultaneously being grocers, which is another conversation that sparked amongst people after this movie to talk about people of color, proximity to whiteness and blackness. What does allyship actually mean? And when shit hit the fan, who is really going to stay and be a part of whatever that chaos is, right? Who gonna be have your back at the end of the day? So those two characters were very specific and very intentional, even down to Ryan writing and making the choice to send Bo out into the world and have Grace still in the juke joint when shit hit the fan outside. Because honestly, and if you saw this movie, you may get what I'm saying. If Bo would have been inside and Grace would have been outside, Bo wouldn't have left. Bo wouldn't have did that. I feel like Bo would have he had more loyalty to his friends. But we get to that later. Other character was Pearline, who was a married woman who was down in the South hanging out and kicking it and had a little rendezvous with Sammy, who I talked about earlier. And then we had the main villain, which was Remick, who was a vampire of Irish descent, whose presence started conversation about colonialism, Christianity in Ireland, how Irish people were made indentured servants and understood disenfranchisement and mistreatment by the masses, um, and essentially what that relationship could look like or did look like from the perspective of someone trying to relate it to the Black experience. I know that was a long way to say that, but it was a lot in there and a lot of intentionality. We also had an appearance from the Choctaw Indians, who were in it for a brief moment, hunting Remick down as essentially native vampire hunters. And it was a good moment to see that and to understand. If you understand people's culture and American history, to me, they were perfectly placed and perfectly removed at the right time. So, on some of the themes that this movie presented. I talked about passing. That was a major theme within this. Capitalism and poverty was another main theme within this. People who weren't familiar with this particular fact learned by watching this that a lot of sharecroppers, people in the South, were not paid actual US dollars in currency. They were paid plantation money, which was only good and could only be used at the general stores at those specific plantations. And if you really get into the weeds, some of those wooden nickels and that plantation money wasn't even used as actual currency. It was still tallied and added to your debt, where you would have to pay it back anyway. That became one of the major themes because Stack was a little more understanding of people trying to pay with plantation that money at the juke joint because they worked hard for it, as where Smoke was more stern and firm in his idea that we're not going to be able to do nothing with no wooden nickels. We need to get real money if we're going to keep this place open and we're going to stay afloat. Grief, love, and PTSD was a major theme. Earlier, I talked about how we learned that Smoke and Annie had a baby that died very young, and the grief and the sadness between the two and the loss around the loss that they endured, you can tell, and it was obvious in the character work, that that was a major factor in their relationship and possibly one of the reasons why Smoke was gone for so long. In addition to his character stating and showing it that he felt the need to protect Stack. He was the older twin brother. He said, I kept that boy safe this whole time. He has to follow him around. Somebody got to watch his back because he can't watch his own back. So, that grief and PTSD and love was a factor, but also, was something that could be seen in other aspects of this movie and other characters. The blues was the main backdrop. And let me say this. Ludwig Göransson, who scores who has scored all of pretty much all of Ryan Coogler's movies. He also scored Oppenheimer and Tenet. I'm talking about Ludwig be doing his thing. He ain't had no business scoring the hell out of this movie like he did. Okay. He didn't have no business scoring this movie like that. I feel like in a past and in a other life, I would have been a musician who specifically scored movies. If people say, what do you feel like you would do if you could do anything else? That's exactly what I've been doing. I would have been a musician who scored movies. So when I watch movies, a lot of times I'm listening to the score and how it connects to the film and what's happening in the film. Child, if you look at my history, I be listening to movie scores on my Apple Music. So with the blues being the undercurrent in this movie, the Delta Blues, it was just the perfect synergy to go along with the movie. I mean, just listen to the score when you can. Oh, perfect. A plus. Another thing that was really prevalent was the conversation around African spirituality and practices. Annie's character was a hoodoo practitioner. She had an apothecary. She was, you can tell, one of the people in that community that would be tasked with praying or casting spells or doing anything in that spiritual realm. And she was also the person who essentially, I won't say saved their life because spoiler alert again, ain't none of them survive. She was the person who could identify bad spirits, could recognize when something wasn't wrong, and could name what was actually happening and what they were being attacked by. It was Annie. So, some of the things I made a list, right, of things that stuck to me or some things that I learned by watching this movie and just some things worth sharing and worth noting. And before I get into that, baby, production design also was on 100,000. And if you're into production design and like the world building from that standpoint, when I say production design, I mean the building structures, even down to the color paint that is used. Go to YouTube and type in like conversation with Anna Beckler, who is, well, Beechler. I forgot how you pronounce her name. I'm so sorry. She did a talk with, I believe it was Morehouse, talking about building the world from a production standpoint for this movie. If that's what you're interested in, it was a great conversation. And you really learned some like nuggets and nuances about some of the things that she particularly did, especially around like why Annie's house was blue. The concept of designing the church and the type of wood that they used and how the wood was cut. I mean, perfect. But let me get into the list that of things that kind of stood out for me. And there's more, but this is just all I could think of in the moment. Number one thing about vampires that was highlighted in this movie and in some other vampire films where people can, and I'm not a vampire film, y'all. And let me just also say before I really get into it and get into it again, because I know I keep saying that. If you a scaredy cat, you can go see this movie. It was only maybe 2, 3 jump scares. It was more anxiousness, like what's gonna happen and what's going on. But with vampire movies, especially in this film, the vampires had to be invited in. If they were invited inside, you're screwed. But in order for them to, or if you were outside in their vicinity, they could attack you. But there was this connecting conversation about letting the devil in and inviting those spirits in. And one thing I took away from it is, whether you could be out in the world, you could be in a building, wherever you are, and even just you as a person, you have the choice about whether or not you let the devil in. And again, this could be in a physical space, and this could be in a personal or spiritual space. But I feel like this movie kind of highlighted that we have the personal authority and the ability to decide what comes in and what does not come in. So the way I took that and what I took away from it is, baby, don't let the devil in at your own on your own choice. But if so, don't be upset when shit hit the fan. Another thing is, even the devil knows your spiritual text. There was a scene at the end, towards the end of the movie, where Remick, who is the main vampire character, the antagonist, he was the devil essentially, was finally attacking Sammy, because this whole time he was after Sammy because Sammy's music was so piercing, and so enriching that it pierced what they called the veil. So Remick wanted Sammy. He wanted to turn him so that he can have access to whatever Sammy has and the magic and the power that Sammy has. And when Remick was finally attacking him, Sammy, being the preacher boy that he is, started reciting the Lord's Prayer. And they were in a body of water. And in that same moment, Remick started also citing the Lord's Prayer and was saying, "This is what the people who stole our land were using at us. This they come try to convert us to Christianity. So I too know the spiritual text that you are calling upon to save you." So essentially for me, it says, and it just reiterated, sometimes the devil he know the prayers too. The devil knows the same text. And that doesn't discount or discredit the text, but that just puts things into perspective that, yeah, the devil can call on them as well. Because in that scene, we actually saw it happen in real time. And I keep saying the word essentially. Whatever. That's all. I'm gonna work on that. I just hate it. One thing, another thing. I mentioned how the Native American vampire hunters showed up at the house where Remick was hiding in. We found out that those people were members of the Ku Klux Klan, who were tasked and were going to and planning to shoot up and murder all those black people in the juke joint, which had a fantastic payoff moment at the end where Michael B. Jordan, again, so big spoiler alert, murders the Klan. Like, wrapped it up in a bow. Everybody, my family dead, everybody dead. You know what? And I'm gonna kill the Klan. So payoff. And people are on social media talking about, because once the sun started going down and the native tribe vampire hunters asked if the evilness was inside the house, and the white lady at the door said no. The sun started going down. It was like, you know what? We got to get up out of here. I'm gonna pray for you. And they got on their little horse and they ran off. People were saying, I would love to have seen more of them. Why didn't they stick around? I thought they were going to reappear later on. I want to hear more from them. Why didn't they do something? Why would they? I feel like them being in this movie for such a brief moment was important context and a history reminder for us as American citizens and as people to magnify, why would members of the group or the community that was completely killed off, who had access to ancient information, they knew the land better than anyone else, why would they risk their own lives being attacked by vampires to save someone who is from a demographic who essentially harmed them in the first place? Why would we want that, to see that in the movie? Why would we want them to save the day? Ain't nobody saved them. And of course, from the way my interpretation and from just my own perspective, of course, the natives would be the group of people who would be able to sense and snuff out the evil before anyone else. Of course, they would be able to spot it. If anybody in on American soil could be able to spot when the devil is here, it would be them. And baby, they had Remick on the run. Okay, they was on his ass. Whatever they was doing to Remick, to have him come outside in the daytime and to risk being sizzled by the sun, they was on his ass. Whatever was, hey, that's what he get. Another thing that I wrote down, we need to discuss allyship and what it means to each individual. Because one of the major storylines in this movie was when they were in the juke joint and debating and to strategizing what was going to happen. Grace, who again was one of the Chinese Chinese residents of Clarksdale, who was helping out with the juke joint, and that was their friend. She had relationships with them. She was essentially the one to call in the vampires to come inside, which started the fight and got everybody killed. Now they was probably gonna die anyway. And I understand Grace's perspective because she was essentially thinking she was going to save her family because her husband was already out there and he was already turned. They threatened her daughter to turn and attack her daughter. And if they would have waited in that juke joint until the morning, one, the clan would have showed up, so it would have went down. Two, the next night, the vampires would have continued to hunt everyone in the community anyway. So it had to happen, but it started a conversation about allyship and what that means. One thing, another and very important point that will tie into one of the last things that I bring up is that our ancestral practices are actually what kept them safe. And I'm not saying to discount anything else, but I'm saying if it wasn't for Annie, who again was a hoodoo practitioner and understood and was rooted in traditional African spirituality and practices, if it wasn't for her, they would not have known what was going on. They would not have been able to sense the bad spirit. Smoke wouldn't have been protected all of those years wearing that mojo bag. It was her that was the person responsible for having the knowledge that they needed at the time. And I really love that Ryan wrote that character specifically that way and gave her those moments because it was just golden. And it was fantastic to see a black woman. And then, again, if we talking about hoodoo and spiritual practices, of course it's gonna be a black woman. But it was just nice to be validated, whether that is whether those are your spiritual practices or not, or your lived experiences. Another thing for this is you going to be black people in this country in our history, whether it be current day, during the Jim Crow South, during enslavement, you name it, any point in time, but especially in 1930s Clarksdale, Mississippi, baby, you going to be hunted during the day and you going to be hunted during the night. In this story, during the day, black people were hunted just for being black. Y'all got to remember, if you don't step off the sidewalk when a white person is walking in front of you, you had the possibility or the risk of going to jail. We saw a scene about convict leasing that was highlighted, and Delta Slim had a moment where he talked about those type of situations and vagrancy. But then also at nighttime in this movie, they were hunted by the damn vampires. So you damned if you do, damned if you don't. Hunted in the sunshine and hunted under the moonlight. Another thing that I forgot, and I want to go back to this point with the Annie and Smoke relationship. And I think I might have touched on it, but I just want to make sure just in case I missed it. People on social media they felt away because Smoke was in a relationship with Annie, who is a chocolate, full-figured woman who is not the movie 2025 love interest standard. And I really think, and I tried to get to the root of this and just hearing people talk about it. I think people forget what their own family members look like and their own and they're not able to put into perspective people actually being human beings in the 1930s. A lot of people looking at this movie and they looking at Michael B. Jordan in a love interest. But they are forgetting what men and women looked like and body types were back then. Women were strong. You every day, 6 days out the week, lift 90-pound bags of cotton. You're going to be a strong ass woman. People of all shapes and sizes, skin tones, were in relationships, were loved, had romance, was getting freaky because baby, it was some freaks in this movie. Okay, they was freaky. There's some other scenes I ain't even touch on because it's PG-13, baby. They was freaked out. Okay, but y'all grandmas and great grandmas and great grandfathers was freaked out. They was freaked out in the 30s. Your great grandmama was freaked out. So I was trying to remind people on social media, your grandmama had men. Your great grandmama had men and she had them sweating bullets. So why wouldn't Annie be with Smoke, who happens in present day to look like and be Michael B. Jordan? And let's don't get it twisted. Outside of the costume, maybe Wami Asako is beautiful. Okay. So I just wanted to touch on that because I just didn't like that conversation. And one of the last major things that I want to touch on before kind of wrapping it up, because I can talk all day about this. I can talk all day about this movie, but I would love if y'all can go and develop your own theories about it or let it impact you your own way. Even though I'ma still be talking about it when I log out this podcast. But one thing that has been bothering me for a very long time, and which I loved about this movie, and which also made it very special to me because it brought up some feelings and things that I've already been dealing with and that I already have been unsettled by. And I'm talking about for the last couple years. We need to have a real conversation about Christianity and simultaneously about our native spiritual practices. One of the discourses that stemmed from this was people who are Christians feeling like this movie was demonic, that it was an attack on Christianity, it was church hurt, it was anti-Christian propaganda, and that it was harmful to the faith. And I tweeted, there was an artist who was on Threads who tweeted something like that or posted something like that. And I responded with this. I'm going to read you what my response was. I'm not going to read his initial post, but I feel like as you hear my response, you'll know exactly what was said. I said, personally, I think this film has opened the door to a much needed conversation within the Black community about Christianity, our relationship and proximity to it, how it was presented to us, ways it has been used to help and hurt us, and our willingness to accept the propaganda that our ancestral spiritual practices were evil or demonic. I wouldn't summarize that as anti Christian propaganda. Because one of the things that, when I said have been bothering me for the last few years, honestly, if we in Africa, yes, Christianity was in Africa during the transatlantic slave trade, but it is highly likely that the majority of Africans who were stolen and brought to America were not touched and presented and did not accept Christianity as their own native spiritual practice and their own religion. When we got to the Americas, we know for a fact that Christianity was forced upon us and was presented as a tool to encourage us to remain docile and appreciative of our enslaved status. They even used to make slave Bibles that doctored up the scripture to encourage us to obey our masters and be good slaves. That's not a myth. We know that to be true. So for us to remain in bondage, and for Christianity to still be the primary religion, and for that control to be able to be maintained, along with stripping us of our identity and stripping us of our names, they also had to start the propaganda that African spiritual practices were demonic and evil, which after all of these years, 400 years, that propaganda has worked to a T, because in present day 2025, you still have Black people calling that demonic and evil. But for me, I'm very frustrated that we still allow that to be the case, knowing everything that we know. And I'm a Christian. I love the Lord. I love me some Lord. But I do feel like you can appreciate and live in spaces where multiple things exist. And for Black people to not put it together that if Christianity wasn't presented to our ancestors when they were captured in Africa, but they were put on ships in the bottom of a ship and stacked like sardines and was in the bottom of a ship for 3 months, being seasick, chained to each other, sitting next to possible dead bodies, sitting in their own and other people's urine, feces, vomit, blood, sweat, tears, and were able to survive that while being raped, starved, malnutrition, tortured, and beaten, made it over here and made it through to survive to the point where you, the ancestor, the listener, the human being in 2025 is able to be here today. Whatever those African spiritual practices they were practicing was good enough to keep their ass safe and to keep you here and alive to the point where we're talking about this in 2025. So if it was good enough and strong enough and powerful enough to keep our ancestors and to protect them and to give them whatever tools and strength to withstand torture and horrific treatment, why in 2025 are we still allowing people to call that demonic? It just doesn't make sense to me. And it really, as I get older and older, it's really starting to anger me even more. Cause I'm mad. Like I be so mad about this. I'm talk. I need to. I'm gonna talk to my therapist. Okay, I'm gonna talk to my therapist about it because it has become a major frustration, and I can't fault people for not seeing the things the way that I see them. But I do like to, and I would like to for us, and I will continue to hold people accountable for allowing people to tell us who we are and about our history, and for them to call it something and us to just accept it. If a group of people used a certain religion to enslave you, why would you let that same group of people tell you that the spiritual practices that your ancestors practiced was evil? It's common. I just can't. So I really appreciate this movie even more because while I'm dealing with this personally, and I feel like we as a people are dealing with this as a culture, but we not dealing with it enough and having the conversations that we need to have, this was right on time for me because there's things that happen in the movie that really, really support or really just, it stirs up the discussion. So overall, and I'm not gonna get into what happened at the end, who lived, who died, whatever, because I can keep going and going and going. But it was just overall a fantastic movie. It was a piece of art. It started conversation. It it almost makes me feel like in question, and somebody else was posting this and talking about it. Are we now within our Harlem Renaissance era right now? Because the Harlem Renaissance, I don't know. I haven't dug deep enough in history to know if during the actual Harlem Renaissance they knew that they were in the Harlem Renaissance. I don't know if they thought they was just creating or if they called it that in real time. But with moments like Kendrick Lamar using a platform at the Super Bowl to send a message and to speak to us, and with Ryan Coogler doing the same thing right now, and with people like Beyonce creating a country album to essentially declare in a way that she's taking back the genre that was stolen from us. Moments like that, I'm wondering if we are here, if this is the Renaissance. And if so, baby, I'm all for it. I love it. I love it. This is what I mean when I say I want art and I want to feel and think. Oh, it's just fantastic. So overall, what did y'all think about the movie? Okay. If you did not see it, I highly recommend going to watch this film. You will not be disappointed. I saw it in again IMAX 70 millimeter because that Ryan tutorial. Hey, I told you I bought my ticket now. and I saw it at regular screening at another theater. Both, while the experiences visually were different, both had the same emotional impact. And I'm probably gonna go back and watch again, and I'm gonna buy it when it's on sale because I can't get enough. I can't get enough. Um, but let me know your thoughts about it. And what are some of the other themes that stuck out to you that I missed? There are plenty more, but I can talk about this for hours and I just won't do that to y'all. So I'm excited to hear your thoughts about it. Y'all know where to find me. You can find me at Canelia on social media. So I was done editing this podcast when I realized I forgot to talk about what was probably one of the most creative and will be one of the most talked about scenes involving music, I would say, for a long time, especially with people of a generation that starts with maybe Gen X, millennials, and on. And that is in reference to the scene where Miles's character Sammy is in the juke joint and he finally gets the opportunity to play his music and play his song. He's encouraged by Delta Slim to introduce himself, and that's when he starts the song "I Lied to You," which was written by Ludwig, who scored the score and the soundtrack, but also Raphael Sadiq. Of course, is written by Raphael Sadiq. I was watching a podcast with Ryan Coogler and Ludwig, and they were talking about when Raphael was in the studio with them. He and Ludwig were just jamming and playing, riffs and trying to get music for the movie. And Raphael said, "Was actually I wrote a blues song years ago, and it's been sitting with me for a long time. And I have this song, and it just so happened to be 'I Lied to You.' The lyrics match what was actually going on in the movie. It was a perfect fit." So when I tell y'all, I'm a believer that people were really blessed and anointed to provide their gifts at the right time. That's an example. But in the movie, Sammy is playing, and once he gets into, like, maybe he got through the first verse and gets into the chorus, we see a a montage of our black music being shown generationally across the diaspora. You see people start to appear, ancient African dancers. You see a DJ. It fast forward to somebody who was like a la like a Jimi Hendrix type of musician playing the electric guitar. There were dancers of all genres, all black genres. We had like some people doing a crip walk. There were girls twerking, black ballet dancers. We even saw people of other nationalities and their ancestors dancing, right? And traditional Chinese dancers and so on. And I was wondering too, because my first time watching it, I was like, if they it's a juke joint and it's Delta blues, and Delta blues is a part of black culture, and all black music is connected, and black music was the root of all American genres of music. I wasn't sure why other cultures, ancient dancers from other cultures were shown and present. But then I was watching some old junkets, okay, some more interviews from the cast and Ryan Coogler and the producers. And Ryan mentioned, or was it somebody else? Somebody mentioned, who was a part of the crew working on this movie, that scene was to represent all people, included their ancestors. So if the ancestors of the black people would be present, it will only be right and make sense for the characters Bo and Grace's ancestors to be present. So there was dancing, different genres. We saw moments from Smoke and Annie and Stack and Mary where they were dancing together. There was a moment where when Sammy was singing out and he was holding a note, the camera turned up and the roof started to catch fire, a la the roof is on fire. Some people also interpreted that as, even amongst fire and black people and everything we've been through, we keep celebrating, we keep singing, and we keep dancing. The sequence landed them outside with all of the walls completely burned down, and they were all just dancing and enjoying themselves, cross generations. all different legacies of Black music all together and all being brought there by Sammy singing, which we also learn shortly after in the movie that Sammy's voice could pierce the veil, which is why Remick the vampire, the main vampire villain, wanted Sammy, because he wanted access to his own Irish ancestors, and Sammy's voice could get him what he wanted, which is a play on, or which could be interpreted as, how our gifts and talents are colonized or stolen for the benefits of other people. Everybody want our culture for some reason. But they don't actually care about the outcome. Whether we suffer or hurt or harmed in that. Nope. Sound great. I want it and I need it for myself. And so for me, my first time watching it, I was like, what is happening? Like, it was so seamless. And when I started to see the different people in different generations, I knew like what was happening on the surface level, but it took for me to leave that theater and then be like, oh shit, I get it. Like, I understand what the point is. And Ryan Coogler said in an interview, because he was asked about that particular scene, and he said, honestly, and I don't quote me, I'm paraphrasing, okay? He said something to the effect of, right now in this movie and at this moment, it's the only time I can put this scene in something. This is the only moment and that only opportunity that I have to be able to do this. So he took the opportunity, because in what other circumstances would you be creating a movie that is about 1932 Delta blues set in Clarksdale, Mississippi, where one of the main characters is an aspiring blues musician playing in a juke joint, and the lead villain is trying to take his gifts, his singing ability, turn him into a vampire so he can connect with his own ancestors through the power of his voice in that music. We know this. Black music does just that. It connects with people across generations, across culture. Music can be considered one of the great uniters out of all of the art forms. So I loved it. I feel like when people are in film school or people are in school to be writers and anything within the television or movie space, there is oftentimes where scenes are referenced or movies are referenced for a particular point. That scene in Sinners is going to do that. That is going to be talked about. People going to be trying to analyze it, break it down. You're going to see some people try to mimic it, because that's what Hollywood do. When something works, they be like, oh, that's what people want. They want this. I also predict that everybody going to try to have a vampire movie now, because Hollywood doesn't interpret it like, oh, the crowd and the audience wants nuanced stories that connects culture and history and heritage with horror or different genres and original pieces. No, they see a vampire and they be like, oh, they must want vampires. Great. So it's going to be 1,000 vampire movies. But I just wanted to make sure that I talked about that particular scene, because I thought it was beautiful and dope. And it, like Ryan Coogler said, it was the perfect opportunity to put something like that in the film at this moment in time. So, all right, y'all, that's it. I just want to pop in with that. On this week's episode of Black News, we did a complete deep dive into the movie Sinners, where we recapped what happened in the film, the impact that it had, some themes that people are discussing and taking away from the movie, character analysis, and just overall takeaways of things that stood out for me when I was watching the film. Hit me up. Let me know your thoughts about all of these topics, some or none, and I'll check back with you guys next time. That's it for this week's episode of Black News, y'all. Thanks again for supporting the podcast by sharing, liking, subscribing, and rating 5 stars on your favorite podcast app. To find more information about me, you can check me out at Kennelia on social media, as well as on my website, which is kennelia.com. And as always, thanks for supporting, and I'll be back next week with new topics and a new episode.